Hasn't started yet. They're gonna, give me one
Okay.
second, sorry. All right, we're good to go, Jeff. You can, go ahead.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending and thank you for joining us for the Town of Hamilton joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health emergency meeting of March 23rd, 2020. I think we'll just dig in and get right to the agenda here, right, Joe? The first item on the agenda is the local state of emergency declaration. Discuss and vote.
All right, I'm gonna unmute Tom here. We obviously started this because KP Law recommended that we consider this approach, and several of you had expressed an interest, especially on the Board of Health, about doing something like this. Anthony is on board. The town of Wenham actually did this last week. It was not on their agenda originally, but 10 minutes before the meeting, they added it on KP Law's advice, which was one day after our last meeting. So we didn't get the same advice in the same time. So
Okay.
that's why they've adopted a local emergency order already. Tom, do you want to go ahead and explain the benefits of the adoption, the local adoption? And I'm going to mute myself.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everybody. So this, the issue really has come up in questions from a number of different municipalities. So the question typically has been, do we need to do anything? And also, can we do anything? And so with respect to the first question, as you know, the governor has made a declaration of emergency and adopted emergency orders. Under the general laws, there's nothing in the general law specifically that allows local municipalities to make the same declaration, but there's also nothing that prohibits you from doing so as well. So our advice has been, generally speaking, that the governor's order would generally include anything that municipalities have done up until today, really, and therefore it's not something that is probably absolutely necessary if it was something that you didn't want to do. However, there are a couple of good reasons why you may want to do it. Number one is that it certainly sends a message from the town to the citizens of the town that this is a serious issue that really needs to be taken seriously, and the town's doing everything that it can to assist in preventing the spread of this pandemic, and we're taking actions to make sure that our citizens are safe. And it conveys, obviously, a strong message from the town in terms of what the town's expectations are for folks in town. And then second is that, ultimately, it's our expectation that there will be federal and state aid that flows from this emergency. And so one of the questions that quite possibly could be asked when you're filling out the various applications for either grant funds or for reimbursement of expenses that have been incurred by the town to fight COVID-19 and to implement some of these public health issues will be, okay, when did you declare it to be a public emergency? So, there's probably some benefit in terms of doing it for that reason as well. And then today, there's, as you, I'm sure, have seen at this point, the governor adopted a new order that essentially designates certain businesses as essential functions. It's somewhat vague in some instances, but it's essentially revised guidance to prohibit functions or any kind of gatherings of now no more than 10 people. It also imposes some other restrictions, which I'm sure you've seen. So we've seen a number of communities now adopt orders in the last week. I sent a couple over to Joe, which I know he forwarded over to you to take a look at, specifically Swampscott, the city of Medford, and North Reading all had adopted specific bans on certain types of service businesses that where it was impossible essentially to observe social distancing, barbershops, massage parlors, tattoo shops, hairdressers, nail salons, things of that nature. So, and those, until local municipalities started kind of banning those activities over the last week or so, still arguably would have been permitted under the state, under the regulations that had been put in place so far to date by the state. So this new order that the governor issued today, I think, eliminates many of those, essentially forces the closure, essentially, most of those businesses. However, other communities have still adopted orders that are even more stringent, such as Nantucket and the town of Provincetown, which I had sent over. The Provincetown one I just received, so I sent that over to Joe fairly recently. So there's, I think, a couple different issues here. The first issue is, do you adopt a local declaration of emergency? I see no reason why you wouldn't or shouldn't do that. And then second is, what, if anything, do you want to put in place as far as essentially additional restrictions that are beyond what the state imposed today? And you know, we're looking at it as essentially that in the language in the state, in the revised order that was issued out by the state, basically says that the guidance that's essentially being issued here today is really I guess I view it more as a floor, essentially, than a ceiling. So as long as you would, we view it as local boards of health in cities and towns are able to adopt impose restrictions and adopt regulations that are more stringent than what the state currently has in effect, as long as any of the regulations that are adopted do not conflict with the state order. So, for example, you couldn't adopt an order that prohibited everyone from using public transportation, for example, because it could be that doctors, nurses, other medical personnel, or other essential workers use public transportation to get to their job with performing essential functions. So that's, I think, it in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll stop speaking now so that you guys can talk and ask me any questions that you want.
Okay, so if it's okay with Jeff and the rest of the board, you can nod or what. I'm going to go through and start with the two select people and the Board of Health chairman that aren't on video, so they can't see us, and see if people want to give questions. Is that all right with you, Jeff?
Sure, that's great. Good idea.
All right, we'll start with Rosemary. Rosie, can you hear us? You good?
Yes, I'm fine. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So, just a general statement. I think this is a good declaration. I feel that I would like to see a little bit of the language modified a bit, because while we want people to take this seriously, we don't want people to out and out panic. And so, if it would be appropriate, I would like to suggest an amendment to one of the recitals.
Okay, well, so that brings up a good point. Has everybody seen, if you're on camera and you can see me nod, has everybody seen the draft Hamilton Declaration of Emergency that was sent out late this afternoon? No, Giselle, you haven't? All right, we'll have Jeff's shaking his head, Bill and Sean are shaking their head. Darcy, have you seen the draft Hamilton, the latest?
I have.
Okay. For Giselle's benefit, I think we should probably at least read it. Jeff, do you want to read it? Do you want me to read it, or?
Joe, if you don't mind reading, I don't have it here in front of me on my screen.
No, not a problem. I was afraid you were going to say that. Excuse my tongue-tiedness. Okay. Whereas the 2019 novel coronavirus, COVID-19, is a highly contagious and potentially fatal respiratory disease, the prevalence of which is increasing rapidly throughout the world, inclusive of the United States and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And whereas on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization designated the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic health emergency. And whereas on March 10, 2020, the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts issued a declaration of a state of emergency to respond to COVID-19. And whereas on March 13, 2020, the President of the United States announced a national declaration of emergency. And whereas on March 15, 2020, Governor Baker announced emergency actions to respond to the evolving COVID-19 public health emergency impacting the Commonwealth, including prohibitions on public gatherings of 25 or more people and prohibiting on-premises consumption of food or drink at bars and restaurants from March 17, 2020 until April 6, 2020, as well as suspension of elementary and secondary school education operations from March 17, 2020 until April 6, 2020. And whereas the Select Board of the Town of Hamilton and its Board of Health, in consultation with the State Department of Public Health, has determined that COVID-19 presents a major disaster which poses an immediate threat to public health, safety, and general welfare of people residing both within and outside of Hamilton. And whereas the Select Board of the Town of Hamilton and its Board of Health have determined that immediate public action is needed in order to prevent or minimize the spread of COVID-19 by and among the people of Hamilton. And whereas it is critical to take additional steps to prepare for, respond to, and mitigate the spread of COVID-19 to protect the health and welfare of the people of Hamilton. And whereas declaring a state of emergency will facilitate and expedite the use of resources to protect persons from the impacts of COVID-19, including but not limited to emergency expenditures pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 31, and limitations on operating hours and access to public buildings. And whereas the Select Board of the Town of Hamilton and its Board of Health recommended that a state emergency be declared in the Town of Hamilton, now therefore we, the Select Board of the Town of Hamilton and its Board of Health of the Hamilton, Massachusetts, hereby declare that as of 3/23/20, a state of emergency exists in the Town of Hamilton. This declaration of emergency shall remain in effect until further notice is given, pursuant to our judgment that the conditions leading to this declaration no longer exist. So I'm going to open up all your mics here for a minute. I think that one of the things we have to go back and do publicly is remind people that this is a public meeting, that all votes taken, because this is being done remotely, will have to be done by roll call vote. I am only unmuting the microphones of those people who are on boards. And I guess what I'd be looking for is from one or both boards, a motion to accept this or approve this so that we can have it for discussion purposes. And any amendments could follow that.
Joe, after we make the motion,
Yep.
we will have time for a discussion if necessary.
Yes. Yep. Following Robert's rules, you open the discussion with the adoption of a motion. So,
Okay, then I will
or
make
the
a
moving of
motion.
motion, right?
Shall I continue?
Yes. Go ahead. You move the motion. Sure.
Okay, Darcy Dale speaking. I will make a motion that we vote on whether Hamilton should declare an emergency
Second.
as per the verbiage that was just read.
Okay.
I second.
Who was that? I'm sorry.
That's Chris. Yeah.
Chris Small. Okay.
May I ask some questions? This is Darcy.
Yeah. Darcy, go ahead.
Okay. Will there be people who may be suspected of having the COVID-19, if they are tested and they come out positive, what are the steps to make sure there's compliance? Would this be a Board of Health function?
This is Tom McEnany. I think I can answer that question. So, yes, it would be it's a public health nurse function essentially. If somebody is identified as, is my understanding anyways, that if somebody is identified as testing positive for COVID-19, then the public health nurse would be notified, and the public health nurse would, I believe there's some testing protocols and, obviously some restrictions that are put in place with respect to the individual. I believe if you test positive, then you're required to be in isolation for a period of time. If you are exposed to somebody who's tested positive, for example, if somebody, other folks who live in the house with the person who is who has a positive test must remain in quarantine for a period of 14 days.
But that's separate from this order. That's a separate sort of protocol.
Yes.
This order doesn't revolve around dealing
Right.
with the individual. It's just more dealing with it as a community, right?
Yes, this is right. Exactly. This is essentially a declaration that would be made by the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen jointly that there is an emergency that is in effect in the town. Anyone who, and with respect to if someone in town were to test positive, that's really unrelated to this order.
All right, Joe, I have two questions for you. One is, this was written probably before today, but we have a new order on March 23rd. Governor Baker issued the Essential Services Order. Does that need to be referenced on here? Because that's probably the most restrictive order he's issued. So I'm not sure if we need to reference that on this.
I'll defer to town council on that. Yep.
Yes, I think so. That was my thought as well. When this was drafted, obviously it was drafted prior to going into effect.
And then legally in the last paragraph, now therefore, I'm just curious in terms of, I think Rosemary's asking, I think she had some suggestions about maybe change them. But one of my questions is, you write in the second line of that last paragraph, a state of emergency exists in the town of Hamilton. Do you have to actually use that word, a state of emergency exists in the town of Hamilton, the word exists? Or right now this is sort of preemptive than reactive, right? This is proactive rather than reactive. I just didn't know if that's legal terminology. You have to use the term exists in this order.
Well, we could.
What would you propose changing it to?
I don't know. I'm just asking.
Could I offer that just because I think that people, I think one of the reasons for recommending you guys take this action today, both boards take this action jointly today, is that just because we don't have an active case in the town of Hamilton due to testing, doesn't mean that there isn't an active case in the town of Hamilton that we don't know about. So I would suggest that you already have an emergency in place. It probably makes sense to leave the verbiage there as that. I do agree with Rosemary that perhaps, I think she and I spoke a little bit earlier, exchanged texts earlier. I think her concern was in the opening recital, and I'm sure Rosie will correct me if I'm wrong, where it says potentially fatal respiratory disease. I think she wanted to amend that language slightly, and I'd be open to hearing what she had to offer, because I don't recall it off the top of my head. Sorry, Rosie.
Okay. So, of course, I work on the front lines at Mass General, and this is a time when I feel very privileged to be on the front lines and really looking at the reaction of people who are affected by this in many ways. And I've also read a lot of things on Facebook about people using this very same language. And one of the things that we are doing in the hospital is trying to prevent panic and calm people's fears. And so the first recital is very frightening to all of us, highly contagious and potentially fatal respiratory disease. And that, of course, is true for a small amount of people that we know of. And so what I would propose is that after potentially fatal respiratory disease, this language, most particularly to certain high-risk individuals with pre-existing disease or immune compromise, comma.
Join the Zoom one.
And there, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we've got some new people joining us. I've just sent them some private chats just to let them know that most of the microphones are being muted except for the board members right now. So thank you to the folks who have joined us and watching from home. I'm glad that this is working so well, but I've muted your microphone so that the board members can speak.
Okay. And so what I believe this added language will do is certainly highlight the risks of this. It is highly contagious and it is potentially fatal respiratory disease, but the vast majority of people do recover from this, and I think it's important that we make that clear as well, that just because this is a horrible disease doesn't mean it's going to be potentially fatal. That's a really scary statement. So that's why I wanted to modify it with some medically factual data. And that's all I have to say.
I absolutely agree, Rosemary. So we haven't come across. So I'm also at Mass General, and our role has been to really help help our frontline clinicians deal with the anxiety as well as our patients. And I think I fear this getting lengthy, but I think that what we're trying to communicate here is not so much the fatality of COVID-19, but more so the ease of spread. And that's what we're seeing, is that rate of transmission is so high because of the fact that people will be asymptomatic largely and still increase the likelihood of transmission. And I'm not sure, because I've been in meetings all day, so that's why I apologize. I hadn't seen the email you had sent, so I forwarded it right now so I could see it. But I think that somehow indicating that in the language, just indicating that we need to make people aware of how easy it is to transmit this, and that's why we have to take these extra precautions. It's going to be really important.
Right, of course. So do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
With me? Okay.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree. I don't disagree. I think that the people are quite alarmed, and that's not helpful. But we do need to be cautious.
Absolutely. I think this is a very important and necessary declaration. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind about that.
Okay, so
Can you read your revision one more time?
All right. So the first recital, whereas COVID-19 is highly contagious and potentially fatal respiratory disease, this is my requested inclusion, most particularly to certain high-risk individuals with pre-existing disease or immune compromise, comma, and then sort of restate a few words as is necessary, the prevalence of which is increasing rapidly throughout the world. All of that, I think, is fine.
I'm fine with that.
Joe, can you hear me?
yes, I can. I'm copying it down right now.
I think we really, really need to emphasize that the elderly are the most vulnerable. It's really critical because 30% of our population falls into that cohort, and it's really essential that these younger people, anyone who's not elderly, understand that it is fatal in 20% or more, I don't know, of the cases of elderly people. It's very, very high. And I think we need to plant that seed in so that people will understand it's not just because you don't want to spread it around everybody, but you really, really have to be so careful around people in their senior years. And I would like to see that written into however Tom wants to do that, if everyone agrees.
Okay.
Well, the statement of particularly certain high-risk individuals, that's certainly. I didn't want to be too specific and say mostly older people because we do know. I don't know.
I think the more information we can put out there, the better it's going to be for everyone. I'm more advocating for more information, not less.
And it's just age is a hard thing to define. I mean, so everybody older than me is old, so it's a hard thing to. So, no offense, but it's hard, we're not medical professionals, so I don't know if we want to. It's more of a characteristic.
Right. Yeah, I think this is Tom McEnany. I think with respect to the declaration of emergency, I don't know that something like that would need to be included. However, obviously to the extent that the town wants to put out information on its website or links to DPH or CDC guidance and other materials of that nature with respect to, steps that people should take in terms of maintaining hygiene and using hand sanitizer and washing with soap and water and warm water for 20 seconds or more, and things like that. You can certainly put that stuff out there. I don't know that those types of things are the things that you really want to include in a declaration of emergency. I think the document is intended to be, relatively straightforward in the sense that, these are the facts and the findings that we're making in order to determine that an emergency exists, and we're making a declaration that there is an emergency.
Yeah, someone under the age of 50 gets sick, and we said, "Oh, you said it was only the elderly."
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it sort of makes us look like we don't know what we're talking about. So I think it needs to be somewhat general and descriptive. So.
Is there a second? I'm sorry, Chris. Is there a second on Rosemary's amendment?
A second.
Okay. So we'll include Rosemary's amendment, and we'll include adding a recital about the governor's order today as well. So I've got those two changes to be made. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very much in support of a state of emergency being declared. I'm very concerned that being out in public a very little bit in the last few days, people don't seem to be getting the whole 6 foot distance, the social distancing part of this. It's all, I think a lot of people are very confused depending on what they've been watching, what channel they've been watching on television. They've been getting misinformation about it. I mean, I had someone stop by my house to pick up something today, and at one point I said to him, "Well, you notice I'm backing away from you. I want to maintain the 6 foot distance," and he rolled his eyes. And I could tell right away that he didn't really believe it, that was necessary.
Right.
So I think anything we can do to reinforce the seriousness of this across, I stopped in a CVS to pick up a prescription, and there were 3 people standing at the end of an aisle, heads, a foot apart, if that. There's an awful lot of that still going on. The streets are emptier, but when you get into stores and things, not everybody's working in this, and I don't really believe everyone understands how serious it really is.
I agree. Yeah, there's a question I had for Tom was I mean, there's the declaration of emergency, but there's also an order. We could issue an order. So my question was, because the governor issued an order today, does he supersede any order that we would come up with, or can we supersede him if we made it more restrictive? I mean, I'm not suggesting we do. I'm just curious about how that plays. And if we had an order that was more restrictive than the state order, would that allow?
Bill, if you saw the one from Providence that Joe said, or P-Town that he sent around, that was very restrictive. They had said no even walking outside your house. I think foot traffic, riding your bicycle, skateboarding, etc.
Right. Yes. Provincetown was significantly more restrictive than what the governor's order had, and ultimately, basically, it's our opinion that the local municipalities, that the town of Hamilton and Board of Selectmen and Board of Health have the ability to adopt any order that they want, to the extent that it does not conflict with the governor's order. So the governor's order is, somewhat comprehensive. There are some provisions of it that obviously are, some of it, frankly, I think we're going to get some clarification on, specifically with respect to the construction issue.
Yes, I agree. I emailed the governor's office today on that exact question, but yeah, it seems to be less restrictive and more general because it's so much longer. It lists a lot of exemptions. So that's right. Because
there are quite a few different businesses and different types of work activities that are deemed to be essential. So, and some of them, I guess, people may question whether or not they are essential.
But should we have a separate discussion after this emergency declaration about a more restrictive order? Or, I think that's a separate discussion, right? But I just want to say, my question is, should we talk about it today?
You can. That's why we included those items on the agenda for the updates and things. So you definitely have it open to be able to talk about those. And if you decide to make a motion to do something else, we'll work with you on it. So
I agree with Chris that we need to make it, be serious with our community, that they have to understand that. Yeah, I'm glad you could close the parks finally, because I was unbelievable watching people on the playgrounds.
Absolutely.
I was just, amazed at people on the playgrounds. It's like, what do you
kind of to the
basketball?
Yeah, to Joe's or to Bill's comment there on the playgrounds and stuff, in the declaration, it says 25 people. Did the government say it was 10 people or more now?
It was today, yeah.
10,
So we're gonna have to amend that language in the,
Change that in the
yeah,
language.
we're gonna have to amend that
That's
language.
right. Yeah, I think there will be we should make a reference to the new order
The
that
new
was
order,
issued
right.
today.
Yep.
The other change, Joe, that I would suggest is that in the declaration itself, I think you can certainly say that, now, therefore, we, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health and the Town of Hamilton, hereby declare that as of, and I think you can backdate the date when you believe that the emergency started. I don't think you
Okay.
necessarily have to use today's date either. I think you can say that it's essentially been an emergency since, at or about the time that the governor made his original declaration on March 10th, if you wanted to
Okay.
do so.
All right, does the board want to do that? You want to backdate the order? Okay.
Okay with that.
Board of Health
we
as well?
should add anything?
We're gonna take all these as roll call votes in a minute, but,
Do you think we should add anything in the declaration about referring to the CDC website or other things like that, just for people that may not read all the other things that we're sending out to them if they see this declaration that would said, for a daily update or whatnot, more information, go to the CDC website and use your best practice for whatever they're telling us to do.
I haven't seen anything like that in the actual declaration itself, but a lot of when towns have posted the declaration on the website, they have included oftentimes some additional information, such as links to the CDC website or to the Department of Public Health website with respect to, what should you do if you think you have coronavirus? What do you, or if you've been exposed to coronavirus? What are some of the steps that you should take in order to try to minimize the spread of the virus and things of that nature?
And I think can we do that when we post this and put the links on our website?
yeah, we'll put the links on our website.
Practical.
Yeah,
We can do, right?
we can do that. I think some of the links are already on our website. We've already got links, so we'll refer to those links when we post this. That the links are on our website as well, so. So do folks want to go ahead and take a vote on the declaration with the amendments that have been suggested so far?
We have to vote on the amendment first, and then we have to vote on the, how do you want to do it, Joe?
Yeah, so right now, we're talking about the amendment for the language that Ms. Kennedy suggested, which was seconded, and then the recommendations to add in a recital referring to the governor's action today, and to backdate the order to the original governor's declaration on March 10th. So if you want to, by roll call, vote on all three amendments at once, I will consider that, unless Tom tells me that's wrong. And we'll start with
So moved.
Okay, so on the amendments, as a, we'll go with the Board of Selectmen first. Bill Olson,
William Olson, aye.
Sean Farrell,
Sean Farrell, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosemary Kennedy,
Rosemary Kennedy, aye.
Jeff Hubbard.
Jeff Hubbard, aye.
On the Board of Health, Chris Small,
Chris Small, aye.
Giselle Perez,
Giselle Perez, aye.
and David Smith.
David Smith, aye.
Okay, so the amendments are adopted. On the declaration as amended, we'll go through the same list. Bill Olson,
William Olson, aye.
Sean Farrell,
Sean Farrell, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosie Kennedy,
Rosemary Kennedy, aye.
Jeff Hubbard,
Jeff Hubbard, aye.
Chris Small,
Christopher Small, aye.
Giselle Perez,
Giselle Perez, aye.
and David Smith.
David Smith, aye.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That gets the first order of business out of the way, and we'll make those amendments. We'll have an updated copy of this for you all to sign, and if you want to just make arrangements with me and Michelle to stop by Town Hall. Despite the fact that most Town Hall staff won't be here after tomorrow at noon, I will be here, so we'll be around to have you get that signed.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah. Next on the agenda is update on local government operations. Joe?
Yeah, so I forwarded you 2 letters. One is, and I think both boards got all this. Forwarded you 2 letters. One is a kind of a draft of kind of operating, or how we might be operating. This was drafted this morning prior to the governor taking his action. The second one is a more personal letter from me to the staff and potentially the residents. All of this stuff would eventually get posted on the town hall website. But basically, what I've been working with the department heads today on is a plan to reduce staff to just kind of an essential level. The governor's order is not a shelter in place. It does not require people to stay at home. It allows for people that can work from home to work from home, and if there is a need for people to be in, they can be in concert with the town's continuity of operations plan. I have that today. Although it's quite old and needs to be updated, there's a lot of leeway in the plan itself. Just basic things that people wouldn't at first think of, like we're going to have police, fire, and DPW working. That means we have to pay them. So we need to have payroll be processed somehow. That function is not something that can be performed from home. So I'll be working with the department heads to ensure that we reduce staffing levels so that there's nobody working in an office where there's somebody else working. There will be there won't be any overlap, but there may be occasional rotating of some staff. And some folks will just be working from home, and other folks may be on call, so to speak. We're trying to make this as safe an environment for both the town workers and the public, reduce the number of interactions for them, comply with the governor's order, but still be able to provide the minimum level of continuing services for the town that have to go on. So I'll share all that with everybody when the plan's finally developed, hopefully by noon tomorrow. But we're working on that, and if you have any recommendations on either the 2 letters that I sent you or other ideas, please feel free to send them to me. I will be trying to finalize that stuff tomorrow. As much as possible, this building, Town Hall, I'd like to make sure that there's never more than 5 people in here at one time. And we're doing that by trying to get as many people as possible to work from home. We do have a program called Log Me In that allows people to use their personal computers at home to log in and utilize their, they'll actually be working on their town desktops remotely. But not all that work can be done that way. So those are the kind of allowances we're trying to make. We're also going to be trying to have people, as much as possible, that are willing to have their phone calls forwarded from their desk phone to their home phone or cell phone, so they can answer. The people calling Town Hall will get a live person. That person will just be sitting at home in their kitchen instead of at their desk.
Joe, how's the staff doing? What's the general kind of sentiment of everybody?
I think
what's the stress level like?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit overall in Town Hall. The attitude is pretty good. There is some nervousness. There's anxiety. We do have some of the folks that work in Town Hall are getting up there a little bit in years. They're a little more senior, and therefore they're more anxious. Or some of them have underlying or pre-existing health conditions, so they're a little bit more anxious. But we're trying to get across to them that the goal is to protect them and the town as best as possible, with all of that all mixed into it. So, yeah, I'm open to suggestions on how I message that. So, it's particularly that second letter, I'm open to feedback on.
What about you getting information out to other committees in terms of their ability to use the Zoom program?
Yeah, so I will do that. Michelle and I will share with everybody how this can be done. This it's going to require a little bit of working, because the way we bought into this program so far, we only have one host. That's me right now, because Zoom doesn't have an ability to use a PO. So I bought this on my credit card. So I have to figure out a way to get people to host other meetings or host them for them. So we did in last week's actions really essentially ask people to only have essential meetings. So virtually every meeting that was on the docket after your meeting last week was canceled or postponed, and we'll continue with that. I should say that given the governor's revised order today. I'm planning to amend our declaration to keep town hall closed beyond, originally that was supposed to end this Friday. I'm going to just say that we're going to be continuing this working environment until further notice, rather than just, have every 2 weeks having to extend it out. I don't think that this is going to be back to business as usual on April 7th. So I really don't see the need to continue to extend it out. We're just going to say till further notice for everybody's safety. And I will likely be here most days, but I may also take some vacation days.
Joe, I got 2 comments for you. You may have mentioned it, but if you were repeating yourself, I apologize. But so I have 20 guys working for me. It's important to maintain the day-to-day. So in terms of remote working, I've sort of let all the guys and all the girls the ladies take their, all their stuff home with them. What are our remote workers doing at home for technology, printers, keyboards, screens?
So,
town property. Are we going to let them take that home with them, or how's that going to work?
those that need it or want it, we're trying to make it available to them. I've got one extra laptop, and I've actually authorized purchase of 2 others that are basic laptops for about $450 that will allow them to log on to their work computer from home. There are 2 folks that need that.
Yeah, I think it's important to maintain as much, as much that their regular daily life as they can, as it's distraction and productivity and all that stuff. But so I'm in favor of whatever they need. I just, in terms of, it's obviously a lot cheaper. We let them take things home with them, whether they go buy something else.
Oh yeah, we're providing them with the supplies they need to be able to do their job remotely. Unfortunately, like I said before, not all positions are able to be done remotely, and some of those positions may be at home on call. They may just be trying to answer phone calls or check an email, but in trying to comply with the governor's advice and also keep everybody safe, we're gonna have to just go in that direction.
Joe, are we going to, for water and stuff like that, are we going to estimates, or are we able to read meters from their vehicles and stuff
So
like
we
that?
can do radio reads, and typically we only go into homes to read a meter when there's a problem. So sometimes the transmitting meter has a malfunction and it doesn't pick up. We'll estimate those reads for the foreseeable future.
So Joe, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about it today, but maybe in a future meeting, but just hear you talk about the sort of financial stability of the town with, excise tax and property taxes due, and sort of when does that become an issue, and how are we going to address that? So
We're already, Marissa and I have already been talking about that. As of today, we informed all department heads to only purchase what's necessary. We're putting it, not a spending freeze per se on, but just let's be very cognizant of what it is we're buying from now till the end of the fiscal year. I think we're in pretty good shape right now, but we are going to see some areas that aren't going to meet targets because of the lack of activity. Building permits, for instance. We've been on track for a really good year, but with virtually no activity in the last quarter because we've asked residents to only seek those permits that are necessary. So there will be no permits being sought for home additions, different things like that. So we're anticipating, missing the mark in the fourth quarter revenue in areas like that, other fees. That's one thing that we should talk about. There has been, some folks, I've heard from several of you on the Board of Selectmen about the trash fee, the every other week trash collection. I think last week there was one set of opinions that I was hearing from some folks that, there wasn't a reason to change yet. This week I've started to hear back the other way. I'll just say it's your decision as a board if you want us to continue with the every other week. But, I know that from just being home for 4 days in a row this past weekend, my family generated a lot more trash than we normally do. It's not a big issue. In one respect, people are still going to go out to the grocery store so they can buy the blue bags when they're there, but at the same time, anything that we can do to help people feel like we're trying to hear them in their struggle in this time might get you some goodwill with the voters. So that's up to you. It's your policy. We stand ready to implement it. The other fee that we're concerned about was that you had authorized, and we were preparing the water rate change. We are going to recommend that you keep that one in place. That one is kind of going to be critical to our ability to kind of hit our marks on paying our bills in our water department going forward.
Yeah, that one's going to affect more of the infrastructure of what we've got going on. The trash bag isn't going to be that much of a difference, I think. So.
And as for the overall financial health of the town, It's probably changed since then, but last Friday, when I was on a conference call with the state officials, they were already estimating a minimum of a $500 million loss of state revenue. That will likely change the way they do state aid. We're a community that doesn't get a lot of state aid, so the good news for us is our impact will likely be seen later if this recession continues and it affects property values. That's when we'll start to see a real impact to it. I've asked Marissa to go back and research how the town did during the last recession, when there were a lot of foreclosures and homes in arrears, and see what the level of payment on bills was. We currently enjoy a very high rate of collections in the upper 90s. I wanted Marissa to check historically and see what happened the last time the market had a really dramatic downturn, so that we can try to forecast a little bit what we might be reverting to. The state is postponed its debate about the FY21 state budget, and obviously we're holding off on town meeting. Marissa and I will be working behind the scenes with department heads to see what happens if we have to amend our budget proposal. We're not making any changes right now, but we're really looking closely at what the FY21 budget looks like. Estimates are between potentially 4 and 8% change in revenues at the state level. So should we be looking at something similar locally? We have to figure that out.
Tom and Joe, has there been any more discussion from the governor as far as town meeting? We're indefinitely postponed, but it was my understanding last time we had spoke that it would kind of go to a month-to-month budget almost. Is there a hard stop on if we've missed town meeting by our fiscal year start that we move to the month-to-month, or is there any inkling on what the governor will do?
So I'll ask Tom to update us, yeah.
Yeah, so with respect to that issue, there has been no determination yet what the state will do. I think we're still in kind of a wait-and-see approach to see how long the current state of affairs lasts. But it is our expectation that is likely to be what the solution will be in the event that we're in a situation where town meetings haven't taken place prior to June 30th. So that's similar, as you may know, to what cities are allowed to do when they don't have a budget in place by the start of the fiscal year on July 1st, and also similar to what regional school districts are also allowed to do under Chapter 71 in the event that there's not a agreed upon budget and they get approval through DESC to go through that 112 budget until such time as they do have that vote. So that's our expectation. Hopefully it won't come to that, and the hope is that by observing these more perhaps more rigorous social distancing and other practices, that we'll be able to flatten the curve such that we can resume some semblance of normalcy prior to the June 30th cutoff date.
Joe, what are our exposure in terms of income? I mean, things like meals tax, building permits, and our largest exposure is probably property valuations, right? If those go down.
That the largest exposure is there. That's one of the things we have to kind of have to ferret through and see how long before the market affects the property values. Doesn't always happen right away. I don't think that that's going to be a big challenge to us through the end of this fiscal year if we kind of watch our spending, but it'll impact the free cash that gets certified in the fall, presuming everything stays on track for that. And going forward, like I said, we're going to be watching to see what we think that the state is telling us as far as making any adjustments to the budget for FY21 before we get to some kind of a town meeting or month-to-month vote. There's some concern there.
Yeah. And ironically, water usage will probably go up significantly now that.
Yeah, you're probably right.
It might, but at the same time, until the last week or so, we haven't had a lot of water this year. So Tim and I have been already talking that we're really anticipating that this town's going to be in a drought condition way earlier than it usually is.
Yeah, my guess too.
Yeah.
There's no snow melt this year. There's no snow melting in the mountains and running down to replenish our water supply, so.
Snowing tonight, so hopefully that'll help. So Joe, you talked about it briefly. I've gone back and forth with it, but if we can relieve, and I know it's not a lot of money, but if we can relieve a little stress in our community by having people have to go out to the store and buy a boot bag for $2 and have to worry about sort of dealing with their trash and everything else, I would make a motion that we go back to trash every week until the emergency order is lifted. So I would have it be concurrent with the emergency order. I definitely want to go back to it. I think we worked hard to do the right thing, but I think right now we agree that we need to make our community as less stressed as possible. So, so I would be, I'll make a motion that we go back to trash every week until the emergency order is lifted.
Got it. Thank you, Bill.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Sean. All right, do you want to go through roll call, Joe?
Is there any other discussion? Does anybody else want to say anything? I guess you might want to go to discussion then. I mean, you might want to go to a roll call vote. Okay, I think this order is just for the Board of Selectmen, so thank you, Board of Health, for hanging in there, but you don't have to speak up here. Bill Olson?
William Olson, aye.
Sean Farrell?
Sean Farrell, aye.
Darcy Dale?
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosemary Kennedy?
Rosemary Kennedy, aye.
Jeff Hubbard?
Jeff Hubbard, aye.
Okay. That'll make some people feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
This is a trash week though, regardless. So.
It's, yeah. So it won't have to be one done this week. I'll let Tim know first. I'll let Tim know when I leave here tonight. And then we'll put this all together with the emergency declaration and release it. Are there any other updates from state action, Tom? I know that we got something from Senator Tarr's office, but that seemed to relate to elections, not the town meeting. So is there anything else?
That's correct, Joe.
Yeah.
Yes, there was late this afternoon, just before I got on the phone call with you guys, I received an email indicating that there was action on the bill that relates to the election delay. So it really affected two different things, is my understanding. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but at least what I was told in a summary is that there are some special elections scheduled for various Senate and House seats that are up. And so that the order established what the dates are for those particular special elections to fill those vacant seats. And then also there's a provision that deals with municipal elections as well. So haven't had a chance to really read it yet. I'm sure we will be getting something out in the next day or so. Hamilton, obviously at the last meeting, last Monday night that I attended, the Board of Selectmen voted already to continue the election. My recollection is that you already have nomination papers and all that have already been submitted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think we're all set at this point. I'll take a look that that's the case, but my understanding is that the vote by the Board of Selectmen was sufficient, and then we'll obviously need to reschedule the election at some point once we have a better understanding of where we are in terms of the health emergency.
Okay. I'll share that with you as soon as KP Law gets us kind of the breakdown of what the legislation today does, so that you'll all be aware. Unless there's a big change that Tom's not aware of, it seems like we're all set. We should be able to continue with the elections 5 days after the town meeting. Doesn't sound like any of the other deadlines are changing, so that's good to know.
We have a handful of uncontested races. Do we have any vacancies that we would need to fill possibly before we get to town election? I'm thinking of, if we have postponed election and whatnot, we've got a lot of reappointments and whatnot that happen in June. I mean, I guess we can address that when we get to it, but
Yeah, so those are not for elected positions. Those are all for your appointed boards and committees. We should be able to do that remotely when the time comes. The question is, what happens to, for instance, excuse me for pointing you out, Jeff, but for Jeff, who's not running for reelection, and as we pointed out at the last meeting, he just stays in his position until his successor is determined by the election. So, unfortunately, for those people who wanted to have one foot out the door, they got to stick around a little longer. I don't know of any elected offices that have officers who have resigned and refused to continue in their capacity, so I don't think there's any need to do that. If that comes up, I will let you know, and we'll determine if that requires another meeting of the board or whatnot.
Okay. Sounds good.
Is the board comfortable with my decision to keep town hall closed until further notice pending, Okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah, that's fine, Joe.
Thank you. All right, so then updates on steps taken by other communities. The main thing I wanted to point out to you folks was the emergency order from the Provincetown Select Board. It's different from the declaration that you just made. I don't know if anybody here feels like you're ready to do something like that tonight, but I just wanted you to be aware of kind of these types of things that are out there. Now that you've made the emergency declaration, the Board of Health would be free, they would have been free anyway, I think, to go ahead and order, hair and nail salons, for instance, to close in town. I don't think we have any tattoo parlors. There are some towns that are doing things like closing liquor stores, although I think that you guys would have a mutiny on your hands if you recommended that here.
I believe liquor stores, Joe, are actually identified as essential services under the governor's order as well.
Interestingly enough, he didn't do the same for pot shops, which is kind of funny. I don't use pot, but I found that really kind of funny. They intentionally left them out.
I'm not sure that that's accurate, actually. I thought one of the things, at least some of the guidance that I've seen has indicated that retail dispensaries are, in fact, considered essential and can remain open.
I thought only medical are considered essential, not retail. Retail are not considered essential. Medical are.
I did see something that said retail as well. So, but again, I haven't looked into that closely.
Yeah, Joe, obviously we can issue orders at any time. We're probably not ready tonight to issue an order, but the only thing I thought maybe we just want to issue an order just to reinforce the governor's stay-at-home order. So I'm not sure if it's worth us just sort of rubber stamping it ourselves, just so we sort of acknowledge it and we're behind it, or we want to work on an order for maybe next week and talk about something more restrictive. So I'm up for either discussion, right? But I think it's important that our community knows that we take it seriously and they should take it seriously.
With Bill's comment there, if I may add to it, with the order and the declaration, how are we going to get this out to people? Are we just going to put it on the website? Are we going to put it on HWCAM? Are we going to robocall? I think this is going to need to go to everybody in the community.
Well, I'm going to ask my friend Anthony to unmute his mic, because Anthony and I had talked about potentially trying to do kind of a joint PSA with the chairman of our respective boards of health. Certainly, if the members of the Board of Selectmen want to do something like that, I'd like to try to arrange it with HWCAM just to get some information out into the community. And we do so much with Wenham, I'd like us to do it jointly and collaboratively. Anthony, how do you feel about that? Did he just turn his mic off? He turned himself off. I think he left the meeting. Oh, there he is.
No, I'm on. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see you now. All right.
We certainly can do that. We did issue a press release on Friday to just summarize the board's actions on
Anthony, something's wrong with your something's wrong with your feed. You're having a problem coming through.
Joe, you can take a peek on our website for that. But certainly having a joint PSA is a great idea that we can set that up.
I couldn't hear that.
Yeah, Anthony, you were breaking up. Your video's frozen right now, and you're breaking up. I don't know what's going on.
But I did have something to contribute.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. No, now I can't. Now you're frozen again. Go ahead, Giselle. I'm sorry.
So I think, it's...
Uh-oh.
Go ahead, Giselle.
Hello?
Go ahead,
So
Giselle.
I think putting it on the website wouldn't be sufficient. I think our community is pretty active on Facebook. So whatever we do, actually, that's probably a really helpful medium for sharing information, and you'll get reactions as well. Sometimes probably not the ones that you want, but I think that's actually an avenue that we would want to explore. But I do want to encourage that whatever order is placed, there's an importance to providing people with resources. So clarifying in layman's terms, because I think what's happening and why people are so confused is because of all this information that's coming from so many avenues. But I think whatever we do, we have an opportunity to clarify for our residents so that they understand why it is that we are either strengthening what it is, reinforcing what the governor is saying, or issuing additional recommendations. So resources are really essential, and also clarifying the pieces.
Right. I would agree with that, and putting things in layman's terms. I think that's an excellent idea.
So in addition, you're just talking about the text that would go along with this declaration?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's because I can't tell you how many people say something like, well, this is a disease for older people. It doesn't matter to me. And I think that comes because there's so much emphasis as to the individuals who are older are essentially more impacted, but there's also those who are immunocompromised. So I work with cancer patients, and they're a population that's highly at risk. So I think it's just, we have an opportunity right now for our community to help inform them. And I think there are enough residents that care that could help sort of spread the information. So we really should maximize our use of social media in this situation.
Okay.
I agree.
Maybe we could, somehow collaborate on writing a short bullet point document that will clarify these things. I think that's what I alluded to when I suggested the modifying language, that it really is, it's just scaring the bejesus out of people. So either they are hyper vigilant or they're just laissez-faire. And if we can help educate people so that they reach a happy medium where they understand there's a serious risk, but it's not something that's going to kill us all. And there are still things that you can do, like you can take your kids out for a walk, and as long as you're keeping a distance from people. I mean, that's actually a very therapeutic thing to do, right? And so things like that, because people are being told to stay in. Well, what do you mean? I see people outside. So things like that I think might be helpful.
Okay.
Right, stressing that everyone keeps saying social distancing, but it's more of a physical distancing, right? We're cooped up and we want to be social, but it's physical separation, not a social separation.
Absolutely.
Well, exactly. And you can go out for a walk and say hello to your neighbors, 20 feet away across the street. I think those sort of things, so that people don't. I mean, I'm out of the house because I need to go into Boston, but I can appreciate that people feel very cooped up and need to do something to release the stress. And it's good for people to go for walks as long as you still keep that physical distance from others.
I think, that offers people an opportunity to maintain that sense of normalcy that they're really striving for right now. So that emotional well-being during this time of chaos is really important. And I think we're well positioned to really advocate for our residents.
Exactly. I think that's an excellent idea, because some of the things I read on Facebook, I just, oh my God, I don't typically respond, but I'm wondering, how can we respond? And if we put it as an official town document that educated people, maybe put some sensible guidelines into activities, I think that would be a great idea.
Can I offer to work with the Board of Health on kind of what the messages are that we should have out there, and then I'll bring that back to Bobby Gates and Michelle in my office, and between us we'll access all of our social media inputs. We might even create some new ones. I know we've been talking for a while about wanting to take better advantage of Insta and Twitter. I haven't no interest in doing a TikTok video, but if we can do some of the other things, if we can do some of the other things and maybe drive, you know, I joke about that, but maybe we should be talking about that. Maybe I should be looking for a kid from the Hamilton High School to do a TikTok video for us. It might get a lot more traction if we have them, if we can find a high school student that's willing to talk in their language.
I kid you not. So I use a lot of that in my, so I'm a researcher. And there's a lot out there in terms of when you're thinking of the population that you're trying to reach and communicate to, you do have to speak the language that they speak.
Yeah.
So you are joking, but I think there's a lot of validity to that.
Yeah. I think if I get on TikTok, they're just gonna laugh about the fat old white guy who's trying to tell us what to do. But if we get somebody from their demographic to deliver the message.
Better with you, Jim.
Joe, I'm impressed that you know what a TikTok is.
I have a 13-year-old son. He spent most of the last 10 days on TikTok.
So there you go. You have your.
You're an expert already.
Anthony looks like he's unfrozen, but now his video's gone. Anthony, I'm going to unmute you, see if you can talk to us and we can understand you. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. So you tried once before to talk to us about what we could maybe do on a joint PSA. Tell us, tell the board what we were thinking. Please.
Yes, just to let you know what we did. So, beside the press release, we also did a reverse 911 call and it was supposed to go Friday, but it went Saturday morning. And we did it also on social media and shared that too. So the last area was the PSA, which we were waiting to coordinate with Hamilton. Which now that the board has done that, we can certainly set that up.
Great. All right. Let's work on that tomorrow with Bill Melville. That'll be the next time you see me in a tie.
Okay.
With Joe, are we going to do a reverse 911?
Yeah, I'll set up with the police tomorrow to let people know that you took this action this evening, and that and that that the board's going to have more information for the public coming through social media and other means in the days ahead. So please stay tuned.
Okay.
And then I'll do I'm a little hesitant to get on screen with Anthony. He's such a handsome man, but I definitely want to see us get a joint PSA together to get people paying attention to the importance of this.
Great. All right. Anything else, Joe?
No, it's not on the agenda. We've kind of gotten off of the regular meeting schedule. How do you folks want to proceed going forward? I think we want to continue to set the tone of only having meetings that are necessary and that accomplish real work. But I don't think we want to leave it open that we're not going to meet again for a month. I mean, what do you think? What do you think is a good time? You want to do 2 weeks from today, or do you want to?
Yeah, I want to do 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, I think that, I agree, Bill. Yeah.
But back to the we didn't really close the loop on the order thing. Do we want to do anything with an order? Do we want to work on it for a little bit, or do we want to do anything today?
What did the Board of Health think? Do you think it's worth issuing some type of order, not as maybe as extreme as Provincetown?
From what I heard with Provincetown, it sounds like they're recommending the residents not even to go out. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I don't recommend that. I really don't think it'd be good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Do we want to go on record and reinforce the governor's order? Or do we think that's just duplicity that we don't need to waste our time with?
I mean, maybe if we
It might
post
come
the governor's
to
order.
that at some point. We might have to shelter at home at some point. So let's not do it unless we get the governor okay.
Who's walking?
I think it's that.
Say who's
What's
walking?
that noise?
I think I know who that was.
David.
We're going to just say, how about this? When we release the information on the emergency declaration, we'll also remind people that the governor has ordered a shelter-in-place advisory for non-essential functions, and that the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen recommend that people
enforcing that.
follow
Enforcing that order.
Yeah. How do you want? I mean, the question on issuing an order is how do we enforce it?
How do we enforce it, right?
And we can issue an order, and then are we going to ask our police to increase the number of interactions they have to have because they're gonna be going around telling people, hey, you're not supposed to.
Yeah, no.
So I think we wanna think about that and maybe talk
I
about
mean,
it.
I think we might not have. We can say that we're issuing an order, piggybacking on the governor's order, but I don't think we need to talk about enforcement until things get real close to home here.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to be as cautious as we can, but we haven't had an immediate outbreak where we've got a hot spot in Hamilton, so we can be a little bit
We
more
don't know that.
until we come to that point.
I
don't declare martial law when we don't need to.
Yeah, I think that's the draconian measure that we really don't need to do at this point.
Right.
A last resort.
Yeah, I think this is Tom McEnany. I think some towns were concerned. I think Provincetown and Nantucket are a little bit different than some others with respect to the population that lives there year round. Tends to be mostly elderly folks that perhaps are more susceptible to having, more severe complications resulting from it. They're also summer communities primarily, so they have fewer resources available during the off season. So I think that kind of played into some of what they were doing there as well. But there are other communities I know, Swampscott, for example, the Board of Selectmen and I think the Board of Health as well are meeting on Wednesday, and they're considering adopting a further order that is more restrictive, perhaps not as restrictive as what Provincetown has done, but there were some concerns that had been expressed about observance of the social distancing, where they felt that perhaps additional measures needed to be put in place that go beyond what the governor is suggesting in his order. So it's really up to the individual communities if it's something that you feel is necessary. For example, if you've driven by the Patton Park and you've seen, groups of kids out there playing flag football or people playing basketball and not observing the appropriate level of social distancing to avoid the further spread of the virus, then it may be something that you want to consider adopting. Some towns, for example, shut down all playgrounds. Some towns have put boards up across the basketball hoops so that people aren't able to play basketball. I know at least one town that took down all of the basketball hoops, so the rims are all gone. Taking other steps to essentially close some public, primarily playgrounds and structures and tennis courts, basketball courts, things of that nature from the public, but leaving fields still open. Other towns have shut down fields as well. So it really has been a determination that's really been made at the local level in terms of what you've seen, observed on in town, and what steps you feel are necessary to best address the issue at in the town.
So Joe, while I agree that we shouldn't be too restrictive, I want to be proactive and not reactive. So maybe over the next couple of days, we can look at some things and draft up and see if it's worth meeting again. But I don't want to jump into something tonight. But let's I don't want to be reactive a week from now. We said, we should have done this. So let's take the next 48 hours and look at something.
So some food for thought. I'm sorry, Giselle, why don't you go first? I'm sorry, Rick.
Yeah. Oh, no. So I agree. And I say whatever you put forth here on, really just simplify.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's just whatever order, even if it's reissuing what the governor said, I really even think that needs to be simplified and clarified.
And do you think, and this is more kind of directed towards the Board of Health and Tom, as far as, we've kind of got as citizens, residents, what we should be doing for physical distancing and stuff like that. But as Chris was saying earlier, being in CVS or Crosby's or somewhere in town and people aren't observing social distancing or maybe employees aren't using rubber gloves and whatnot, should we send some kind of message to our businesses in town as some kind of advice on how they handle this situation with customers? I know a lot of businesses today, I went to the Depot Liquors, it wasn't closed yet, and they're doing curbside service. They have somebody come out and deliver it to you in your car. Our Packy was still going in and out of the Packy, and I know Crosby's is still doing a booming business, but we want to make sure there's people in the aisles that are staying a distance from each other, and when you're bagging groceries, maybe you bag your own groceries, et cetera, things like that. Is there kind of a message we want to give to our businesses other than the governor's message as far as a Hamilton message?
Well,
Sure.
Yeah, let me just mention that some stores are actually putting plastic like dots on the floor that are 6 feet apart where the registers are, so that people will know where to stand in line when they're waiting to get checked out. Something easy and easy to get rid of afterwards. But it could be like a peel and stick circle that they could place on the floor, and people could just stand and wait their turn. Simple
Right,
and inexpensive.
Yeah. I went to Trader Joe's, by way of example. I went to Trader Joe's yesterday on Route 114, and they had 2 store employees out front, both with rubber gloves on and both with Clorox wipes to wipe down the carriages. And they basically had the line outside the store so that they would only allow, as of yesterday, they would only allow 25 people in the store at once. And as you went in, it's essentially like a nightclub or a venue where they were at capacity. They set the store capacity at 25. So, and people were pretty good about observing, at least 6 to 10 feet of space in between the various folks who are waiting in line outside the store as it kind of snaked down the sidewalk of the plaza. And similarly, when you were in line, people were generally pretty good about staying, far apart from each other. And then they had somebody who worked for Trader Joe's would come after each individual customer used the pin pad to pay for their groceries. They would come and wipe that down with a Clorox wipe as well. So they took pretty, I would say, very vigilant observation of the, which was a lot different than what I had seen in some other larger chain grocery stores.
Yeah. Do you know, my comment about this is that this is still new and people sometimes just forget. And most people, when you remind them, we need to be careful, and most people are like, oh, geez, okay, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I think I tend to think more, I'm optimist here, but I really think that people just forget sometimes, and until it becomes more ingrained in us, and we can all sort of politely remind people, and as the stores do. So I think that people will get better at it.
so if people want to give me ideas about things that they want to consider for other local orders, I could share them around to everybody. Food for thought, I know that the Metro Mayors Group is a group of mayors and town managers in the greater Boston area. They've recently been having conference calls that have started to invite mayors and managers from all over the state. I've been on those over the last couple of weeks. And there is a contingent of mayors and managers down closer to the city and more densely populated communities that are considering or doing local shelter-in-place orders. But in the discussions we've had with managers in different environments have noted that what works in maybe Boston or Somerville might not work exactly the same way in Danvers, might not work exactly the same way in Hamilton or Ipswich. So we're trying to be cognizant of the fact that lacking some kind of direction from the state, every community should kind of feel the ability to figure out what it is they need to reinforce locally.
So Joe, I will add to that, I'm sure that those high school kids just didn't give a thought to what they were doing on the basketball court. And once they were informed that this is the rule, I certainly am not around 24 hours a day, but I have not seen any kids back at that court. So I think people are very educable, and sometimes they just forget. And once we remind them, they were super. I've not seen any kids down there.
I've noticed even in my own circles around my neighborhood at home with even my wife and I, over the last 10 days, our behavior has evolved. Where we were at the start, and we knew more than a lot of other people out in the world because of our jobs. But where we were at the start is changed from where we are now, and we continue to get a little bit better at it. So I think that Rosie's right.
Yeah.
People are learning, and I think the thing that we need to be cognizant of is this probably is not just temporary. You know, the emergency declaration is temporary, postponing town meeting is temporary, but I think that this is probably the start of a permanent change in the way we interact going forward. Because this is the first pandemic that struck us this way, but I shudder to think what would happen if this was something that had a much higher mortality rate. I think people are gonna be a lot more cognizant of things going forward.
Well, sure. There are just so many unknowns right now, and we will strengthen restrictions as need be, but you don't want to put the total clamp on people until such time as it is necessary, because then you're liable to get more of a revolt.
With all that being said and how things are changing so rapidly, do you feel like we should consider meeting almost every Monday night for just an hour or so, and so we can keep the lines of communication open, the transparency open, talk about some things you brought up? 2 weeks from now seems like an awfully long time away.
Certainly, the rapidity with things change
Yeah,
is.
Joe, Jeff, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Can we keep it at 6 o'clock?
I love that idea.
That's my vote.
Good idea.
Okay.
So
And I have another kind of a suggestion. Since we're talking about whether to issue orders or not, what if we change the title, kind of wordsmith a little bit, and say more so advice or something like that for, you know, some I don't know how to say it, but you know, some tips on preventing this spread or something like that, so we can give some residents and local businesses some kind of advice on what to do, instead of kind of demanding that they follow an order.
Right.
You know, and then that way we can always change it to an order later on, and if it comes to a more severe case, then we can do it then.
Why don't we call them updates? Updates for the DOA.
Or sort of personal safety recommendations.
Yeah,
or something like that.
Okay. All right, we can work with that. We can work with all that. We'll come up with something.
Good idea.
All right, and in the meantime, we'll notify people that the Board of Selectmen plans to meet weekly at 6 PM. David and your committee are welcome to join us, or at least have a representative. I think that the board really feels comfortable having your input in these decisions, so as you're able to have somebody join us, I think we'd all appreciate it.
Right, and I would say any of those kind of advice things for physical distancing and protocol for businesses and whatnot, send them to Joe, and he'll compile them and send them around. I think will that work for you, Joe?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
All right.
All right.
So we'll,
Darcy? Oh, I'm sorry. Are we voting? I didn't hear anything.
no,
You got to make a motion, Darcy.
you got to make your favorite motion, Darcy.
No, Darcy, the motion. I make a motion to adjourn.
And then somebody needs to do the same thing from the Board of Health. So Darcy moves to adjourn the Board of Selectmen meeting.
I second that motion.
Second by Bill Olson. Bill Olson,
Aye.
Sean Farrell,
Aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosemary Kennedy,
Rosemary Kennedy, aye.
Jeff Hubbard.
Jeff Hubbard, aye.
Okay, and then we need a similar motion in action from the Board of Health.
I'll move that we adjourn from the Board of Health.
I second that.
That's David Smith.
Yep.
I second that.
Chris Small?
Okay. And now, Chris Small,
Yes, sir.
aye. Oh, you're voting aye?
Aye. Yes, Christopher
Okay.
Small.
Giselle
Aye, Giselle Perez.
and David.
David Smith, aye.
All right, you're all adjourned. That means we can no longer talk to each other. Have a good night.
Joe, nice job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Thank you, everybody.